Hi there, this is Lilly Vogelesang, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the new features that are in Animate and Animate Pro 3 so that you can get really excited about what's out there and understand a little bit more what it is that we're bringing to the table. First of all, both technologies have been completely rebuilt from the ground up and brought into 64-bit. And this is a huge improvement because in 64-bit you get to take advantage of all the memory on your machine. It makes the technology a lot faster, a lot more robust. It means that you can import a lot more images and work with a lot more textures, and it really just brings the software to a completely new level. Both technologies also now support touch. So if you have a touch screen or on a Cintiq, on an Intuos tablet, or here I'm using the trackpad on the Mac, then you can use any of those to be able to rotate or zoom or pan your canvas around. Deform Animate now also has the ability to use texture brushes. So this is something that's been in Animate Pro for a while, but texture brushes allow you to get some really nice, smooth looking textures drawn in there. I find the texture brushes particularly useful for doing rough drawings because you can really build up on the texture and you can get this kind of col erase pencil feeling. The way that I set up my brushes here is I take advantage of using a semi-transparent color, and then I set up the tool properties in here. The tool properties have been totally redesigned for Animate and Animate Pro. So the way that the tool properties is now is a lot easier to use and it's a lot more user-friendly. So basically you have this tool properties area here where at the top you see the current brush. So when you change some of the properties here on the current brush, you see it affecting up there what's happening on your brush. We have some quick access sliders here that you can use now for things that you might want to change all the time, like the size of the brush or the smoothing. So those you can access just really easily by dragging on the sliders there. And sliders are really nice when you are using, for example, a Cintiq, because then you don't have to use up any of the buttons with shortcuts. You can just drag the sliders there. You do have access to all the properties, however, if you click on the triangle next to the current brush. So when you click on the triangle, you can see all the properties that you can affect for that brush. So we've got the maximum size, which is the same maximum size slider that we're dragging here. And minimum size has been redone to be as a percentage of maximum size. This is the way it's done in Photoshop, for example. The advantage of doing it as a percentage is that it means that you only have to adjust the maximum size all the time. So as you're drawing, you're constantly adjusting your maximum size as you need it. But the minimum size always works because when it's a percentage of the maximum, you still have the same general shape of your line. So that's a really, really nice improvement. We also have the ability to bring in the texture here from the outside. So if you do want to use, for example, Photoshop to create your own textures, you can do that and import them in. And I've even done a tip of the week video on how to create those textures, so there are learning resources available for you there to get going with that. One of the other things that we've redone a little bit here is the way that the presets work. So we have this area at the top where you adjust the current brush, and then you have this area at the bottom where you save presets. So presets are brushes that you want to reuse all the time. So when I set up a preset, you see my preset here is set for 50. If I click on it, it changes the size back to 50 and I can draw at 50. If I change the maximum size on my current brush, see it's now at 150, and I do some changes, do you notice that it doesn't change it on my preset? This is something that we changed, and it's really important to understand that because it's really useful the way it is now. The way it was before, presets were never kind of locked, and so it was kind of hard to keep a constant set of brushes or a real locked set of brushes that you're using all the time. So now, let's say if I want to now take this new brush at 95 and I want to have a new brush in my list at 95, I simply click the Add Brush button, and now I have a new brush in my list at 95. Another thing that we've totally re-engineered is the way that the pencil lines work in Animate and Animate Pro. And this has been available in Harmony, so if you have used Harmony, then you may have seen this already. But the new pencil line does allow you to do thick and thin and pressure sensitivity based on your tablet. And you might say, well, we had thick and thin already, and yes, you had thick and thin on your brush line, but you didn't have thick and thin on your pencil line. And there's a huge advantage to using a pencil line over a brush line. The difference is that a pencil line is a line that's really easy to manipulate after you've drawn it. So the pencil line has these Bezier points on them, and you can sort of drag and reshape your line after you've drawn it. So even if you haven't done it 100% perfectly, you can still use that line. The other thing that you can modify after you draw the line is the thickness information. And this is not something you can do with a brush line. So when I have my pencil line now, I can go in afterwards and I can modify my thickness key points here. I can even modify one side at a time or both sides at a time until I get the line looking the way that I want it to look. You can even take that information from that line and you can copy and paste it onto other lines. And you can even copy and paste it onto every line in your drawing. And so we have this concept of something that is like a thickness stencil. So a thickness stencil is a preset loaded in set of thickness information that you want to reuse all the time. So let's say if on all of my lines here I want to go in and apply that thickness stencil, I can just hit apply, and now I've got some preset thick and thin on my lines. So you can get some really cool, interesting styles just at the click of a button. You can even change the thickness across 200 drawings at one time. It's very, very powerful. In addition to being able to change the position of your pencil line and the thickness information of your pencil line, you can also go in there and play around with the textures. And within Toon Boom technology, we do have a number of preset textures that are already loaded in there, but you can also go in there and import your own. So there is a tip of the week video that will explain to you how to create your own tile textures if that's what you're interested in doing. And one of the things that's particularly interesting about the pencil texture is that what the pencil texture does is the pencil texture tiles the texture along the length of the line and in the direction of the line. So what that means is that if I want to take my line here and change the shape of the line or the direction of the line, you see how the texture follows that direction change? It's a very nice effect. It gives a particularly good looking line. The other thing that's really nice about this is when I decide that I want to paint it in. Even in things like Photoshop, when you try to paint in textures, sometimes you get these little white, crunchy edges around the edge. And here we don't get that. And the reason is that a pencil line is defined by the center of the line. And so when we paint, we always paint to the center of the pencil line. This is extremely powerful when working with textures because it allows you to go in even after you've totally finished painting everything in. You can go in there and decide you want to change your mind about what kind of texture you want to have in there. So I can even apply a texture that's totally different, like dashed lines, for example, and the painting still works. So I've talked to you guys now about the new brushes, the new pencil tool. One of the other things that you might want to do is save out some common brushes or pencils that you're using all the time. And sometimes you want to save not just the presets in the tool properties the way they are here, but you might also want to tie in that particular tool property settings with a specific color. Like for example, if I want to do a rough brush in a blue color for a Col-Erase blue pencil. All I have to do is select the tool properties that I want to use there and then select the color that I want to use. And if I add a new tool preset to my tool preset toolbar, then I can give this guy a name, and I can also choose an icon for it, and I can set whether I want to save the color or the tool properties or both, or neither. You can even use a shortcut and save a shortcut in here, and you can import your own icon there if you don't like one of the preset icons that we have in here. So being able to save out these different tool presets means you can very quickly, at the click of a button or at the click of a shortcut, zoom to those tool properties and those colors. And you can save tool presets for all kinds of different tools, including the brush, the pencil, the paint buckets, just to name a few. Your line tools, any tools that you want to reuse frequently, you can save a tool preset for. This really speeds up your workflow and allows you to save time and save energy by speeding up the process. So Animate Pro still has the same general differences from Animate that it did before. Animate Pro brings you the network view, which allows you to incorporate effects into your character rigs. So for example, when I have something like this belt on the character and I want to reposition my belt, I now have it set up so that the belt is cut off with that part of the body. So being able to cut off specific drawings with other drawings allows you to create some really sophisticated character rigs and give you that flexibility of being able to change the orientation of your character from a front view all the way to the profile view without having to do any new drawings. You can also use that concept when doing things like animating the position of the eyes around. And so here I have the eyes cut off inside the white of the eye there. So I can move the eyes, and when they move outside that region, they're simply cut off. So it makes it very easy for me to take my eyes there and reposition them to wherever I want them to be, and I can even scale them if I want to have them sort of squash and stretch as they rotate around that edge of the eyeball. And you can still do all the same other cutout stuff that you want to do, where you want to, for example, go in there and swap out the different mouths and be able to animate the different mouth positions around and do all the lip sync and all of those wonderful tools. The major new tool that's been added to Animate Pro is the Bone tool. And so the Bone tool is a bone deform that's been brought from the deformation that was there in Harmony. And so since the deformation has been in Harmony for a little while, now that it's in Animate Pro, it's really robust. It's being used in so many productions now, and it's totally revolutionized the way that cutout characters are done. So let's say, for example, if we look at his hair here, there's a bone deformer that's set up on the hair. If I look at the hair is on its own drawing in the library. I've only got one drawing for the hair, but I've got the hair on its own drawing, which allows me to go in there and put a deform on that drawing. And so here I've got a bone set up on the bottom of the hair, which will allow me to rotate the bone around, but you can even grab the end of the bone there and you can kind of change the size of it. So you can have all of that follow through and have the bounce in the hair just from manipulating one bone. It means that you don't have to have a bunch of different drawing swaps for that hair. You can have just one. You might notice that the hair here is actually drawn with some vector textures drawn in there. There's a bunch of different strokes to indicate the highlights on the hair. And even with those highlights and different textures that are drawn in there, as I move the hair around and bend it and warp it, it warps those textures very nicely. Even if you have a bitmap texture that's been imported in and painted in there, for example from Photoshop, it will still be able to use the bones on those bitmaps just as easily as it can use them on the vector layers. Bones also allow you to rig together your character in a totally new way. So for example, I have this bone chain set up on my character's torso here. All of these different layers are still separate layers. I can still animate them separately if I need to and reposition them and swap them and all that good cutout stuff. But if you look at this bone in the center here, I have the bone chain starting in his pelvis, and then it goes up through his torso. And there's a rather large articulation in the center. The larger the articulation, the more bendy it is. So you see, as I bend his torso around, I can bend him all the way so he's crouched over the front, or I can bend him all the way back. And you can even take this bend and you can create a new drawing out of that bend. So you can use the deform either to generate your drawing swaps, or you can just leave it in there and fluidly animate from one position to the other. This used to be something where you would have to have a whole bunch of different drawing swaps to achieve this. You would have drawing swaps for your character in his default sort of resting position. You'd have drawing swaps with him forward, drawing swaps with him back, but here you can do this all without having to swap any drawings. You can just animate the rig that way. And you can see here that there's a whole bunch of other elements that are following that animation. So I have the arms animating around, and even though the arms are on separate chains and they're on their own drawing layers, as I animate the torso, the arms follow that movement, so they can inherit the movement even from a bone chain. One of the other things that's often difficult to do in cutout characters is foreshortening. So here I can actually fake some foreshortening by squashing and stretching his forearm there, or even his upper arm. You could foreshorten his upper arm and then lengthen out his forearm. And you can do that directly within your hierarchy there. So you don't have to go in and separately animate each element. You can go in there and still tweak the way that certain elements look within that chain, but being able to foreshorten the elements in the chain is very powerful. What happens with a standard character rig where you have one element inheriting the transform directly from the other is that if you try to foreshorten the upper arm, all of the other elements get foreshortened too. But with a bone chain, each bone is independent, so if you foreshorten the upper arm, it doesn't necessarily do anything to the lower arm. Also, you can have a bunch of different drawings in there. So, for example, with the hands, I have the hands following the movement of the arm chain there, but I still have the ability to go in there and swap out the hands when I want them. So it's a very flexible way of rigging and a very fluid way of rigging, because if you're rigging by keyframe position from one frame to another, you always get a nice smooth interpolation. But you still have the ability to go in there and take these other layers and finesse them and change them as you need to. One of the other things that sometimes becomes difficult to deal with is how to deal with a character's legs. And so, for example, if we take a look at his legs here, I've rigged these legs in two different ways. One of the legs is rigged from the top down. When the leg is rigged from the top down, this is when you want to have your leg off the ground. So when your foot is off the ground, you want to be able to animate the position seamlessly, whether he is bending his leg or bending his foot. And it's very powerful, by the way, to be able to bend the foot with a deform, because this is something that you used to, once again, have to do a bunch of different drawing swaps for. Whenever you wanted to bend the toe, you'd have to do a new drawing for that. So it's really nice not to have to do a new drawing, because it allows you to do some kind of fun, clever things. And yet, you can still access those different drawings separately if you want to. So even if I want to turn off his shoes, I can turn off his shoes and yet still have the rig maintained and still have the rig working. Sometimes, though, you want to animate with the foot stuck on the ground. And so this is when it becomes useful to animate from the bottom up. So you can start your chain from the bottom, and then you can do things like you can bend the leg this way and bend it that way. And you might say, oh, Lily, that's really cool, but, now the rest of my body is not lining up anymore with where that leg is. But it's not a big problem, because if you just select any of the other elements, you can go up the hierarchy until you get to the group that contains all the elements except the legs. And then you can go in there and reposition that group as necessary. And I can slide that leg back in there to reposition that. And then you can even go in here and access those individual layers if you need to do a little more finessing. For example, on this layer, this skirt has been set up with a quad map on it. And so a quad map is a layer that allows you to do a little bit of kind of perspective changes. So I can grab on the different perspective points, and I can animate his skirt billowing in the wind or changing shape, and it works very effectively with this quad map. So combining together the idea of doing a quad map with doing a bone structure allows you a lot more of a fluid animation than you would have otherwise. And so because all I'm doing is modifying keyframe animation, you can see that even with that animation that I did just now, which I wasn't even planning properly, it interpolates beautifully between one key pose and the next key pose. So you're always going to be able to go in there and make some more fine-tuned adjustments, adjust the ease on that, but the main movement interpolates perfectly from one position to another position when all you're doing is modifying keyframes. So at this point you might be saying, wow, that's really interesting, but often when I'm animating my characters, I have some part of the animation where the foot is on the ground, and then as I'm going through my animation, there's going to become a point where his foot needs to come off the ground. And so what you can actually do is in Animate Pro, you can tie a drawing layer in to a deform. So for example, this drawing layer right here is tied into the deform on the leg. So as I swap that drawing, it also swaps the deform out. And the deform does return to a sort of default position. So now if I want to have his leg off the ground, I can go in there and make some adjustments and reposition it where I want it to go and double check the position of that layer using my onion skin. So if I now check out what this animation looks like, there's a point in this animation. So you can see right here it's going from the bottom up. And then there's a point right here where it's going to swap in now from the top down. So now it's at the bottom up, and then it swaps from the top down. And so you can do a nice fluid animation and swap from a top-down rig to a bottom-up rig at any point that you want. And this is also something that's in a tip of the week video. So hopefully that little intro on what bone deformers are has gotten you really excited about the possibilities, because there's so much that you can do with bones. You can use textures, and you can apply foreshortening to different elements. You can bend elements really fluidly, and you can maintain the hierarchy. You can even swap from top-down rigs to bottom-up rigs at any point in time. There's so much that you can do with Deform. So at this point, I'd love to see what some of you are able to do with it. And this sample material is also available on the website. So if you want to download any of this sample material and pull this character apart and figure out how it was rigged, and ask me any questions about it that you want to, then I'd be more than happy to help you guys out and do some more tip of the week videos. Now that Animate and Animate Pro are released, I'll be able to spend a lot more times interacting on the forums and doing more tip of the week videos. So I'm happy to help all of you guys as you're getting started. But hopefully that gets you a little bit excited about what's new in Animate and Animate Pro. Animate and Animate Pro have been in the works for several years now, so there are many, many enhancements. We had to pick and choose which ones we wanted to discuss in our marketing materials and in these videos. So you'll see a few of those enhancements listed here, but there are hundreds of enhancements that we have done for these versions, and I think you'll be very happy with a lot of the improvements that we've made. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have lots of fun with Animate and Animate Pro 3.